Do the reading gods have a rule about reading quality in the summer? I swear every other year I have a very good reading summer and every other year I have a bad reading summer. And I feel like this year's a bad year and that makes me really freaking sad. Last year I want to say I read like 20 books in July, which is a lot, granted. And it was also oppressively hot last July here in Texas. Not to say it hasn't been awful, but it hasn't been nearly as bad as normal. But something about this year, the reading is just not hitting, and it's making me really sad. But I did read three real winners this month. I read 6 books total, and I started with You Between the Lines by Katie Naiman. This was just okay. This is a debut contemporary romance from Forever Publishing, and they kindly sent me this finished copy, which I really appreciate from them. I really wanted to love this one. I wanted to give it a try because it felt different enough from the premise of Beach Read that I thought I would like it a little bit more. We're not really dealing with any immediate grief in the way we were with Beach Read. And so I thought maybe, just maybe, I would like it more, but it just didn't work for me. So we're following Lee and Will. They are MFA students, both pursuing an MFA in poetry in the same cohort. There's like 7, maybe 10 poets, so they're going to be in close quarters. These two have known each other since high school. Will wrote Lee kind of I don't want to say he wrote her a review. I think he said it in the group, but they were in a writing workshop in summer. He critiqued one of her poems and it really like stuck with her. She was really upset about it. And I think part of it too is because she's always had a crush on him. And I don't think she knew it, but he's always had a crush on her. And so it just sets up for this misunderstanding, but without it being like a miscommunication trope and a potential for a friends to lover situation. And we get that, but it just felt hollow to me. We spend a lot of time in Lee's head, and I think this is where I really struggled. I don't think all romance novels need to be dual POV, but I think ones like this would really benefit from it. I think because we don't get Will's direct thoughts to Lee often enough, we really only get them through her perspective of him and occasionally through his writing. It just made it feel a little two-dimensional, and I really struggled to believe in their love story, even though I absolutely loved Will. This man brought back yearning in 2025, and I'm grateful to him for it. It's just, I don't know. I don't know if this really knew what it wanted to be. And I do think I will read more from Katie Naiman just to see, because I did like her writing style. And I thought she did a really good job of that and of setting a very particular tone. I just think on some of the plot points we needed to be fleshed out a little bit more. So we'll see. After this, I would say this might be my biggest disappointment or second biggest disappointment of the month. It's Lisa Jewell's None of This Is True. I remember watching in the beginning of 2024 everyone's best books of 2023 videos, and BookTube's best of, where I know a couple booktubers love to do those where they compile everyone's best ofs, throw them in a video. This was in everyone's video. I don't know why. Maybe I missed something. Maybe I suffered from listening to the audio that had the bonus chapter that was in the paperback. And maybe if I didn't have that, I would have hated it a little more because it would have had actual ambiguity instead of having an answer. I wish I didn't have the answer because I liked the idea of that in my head, and I had thought that the answer might be it. But in the version that I have hardback wise, where it ends, it leaves you questioning, was this real? Is the person who was involved, were they as evil as you think they were, or is questioning their sanity? Is someone else involved? Something else going on? All of those kinds of questions. And I liked that. And then I looked at my audio and there was still another like 15-20%. And I was like, what is going on? So I kept listening. And wow, I wish I hadn't. I really wish I hadn't. It was not good. It was not good. Pre-2020, Lisa Jewell and I was picking up everything, loving everything. 4, 4.5, 5-star books. Post-2020, we have not been getting on. We have not. And I'm actually really scared to read Don't Let Him In. I have a hard copy of that, and I'm worried I'm going to hate it. I'm really worried, actually. I then had some redemption with Devil is Fine by John Vercher. Thank you so much to William Morrow. No, I'm sorry, Celadon Books for sending this to me like 2 years ago at this point, it feels like. This came out, this is a June 2024 arc, and I just read it in July of 2025. Apologies. Definitely not my intention for it to sit on the shelf this long. I think part of the reason I did let it sit is because the concept made me a little concerned. I was not in a mental space for anything super duper heavy, but it actually, the timing of this couldn't have worked out better. My theme of this year seems to be grief books. This was no exception. I also have been picking up a lot of books about fathers and sons. This fit right into that as well. So we are following a father who has recently lost his son. The father is biracial, and so is his son. And his white grandfather has left his son land in, I forget what state it's in, but it's up north, and it's a beach town. And the land he's left him may or may not be plantation land. And in our narrator's grief, he has been drinking. He has also been trying to write another novel and seek out tenure at his university. And through some of his drunkenness, you're questioning whether some of the things he's seeing and hearing are hallucinations. Is it magical realism? Like, what is it? I really appreciated the questions that came, not only from our narrator, but the people who were interacting with him. I really appreciated that the author left space for us as the audience reading the book to question some things and to ponder and to hypothesize. And it just didn't feel too heavy-handed. This book is maybe 300 pages, and it was the perfect length. I think it wrapped up perfectly without feeling too Pollyanna about it. And the cover makes a lot of sense when you get to the end. I think one of the things that I really enjoyed about this is the amount of humor that would randomly appear. There was some commentary, there were some call outs, there were some call ins. It's so good. This is an author that I will be looking for new titles from, for sure. I then took the biggest L of the month. I have been looking at this series since these new covers came out. I hadn't seen it before. It was a very popular KU series, apparently. Got picked up by a traditional publisher. I had actually happened upon this author because of A Fate Inked in Blood, which I still haven't read yet, but I was a subscriber to the Probably Smut Book Club for a while, and that was one of the boxes, and I loved the imagining of the cover they did for that, and I was like, well, I'm starting to get into fantasy romance and romantasy. I'll give it a shot. So I got that book. I still haven't read it yet. Maybe I will soon and see if Danielle L. Jensen's earlier stuff just isn't for me, or if she's just not for me at all. I really struggled with the Bridge Kingdom. So we're following a warrior princess who is raised in isolation with her sisters in this compound. Her father's sole reason for keeping all of them there is to train them to be the perfect wife and also assassin, and also a, traitor to whoever they're married to. The kingdom that they are from has entered a treaty with the Bridge Kingdom, and I believe it's called Ithacana, and everything runs through Ithacana. And as far as trade goes, if another country is going to attack you, because Ithacana is literally the bridge between the two massive pieces of land, it's coming past there. And so they've entered this treaty to try to, in theory, bring some peace, but there's some other sinister things going on. And that kind of concept, a marriage of inconvenience, if you will, for the two people getting married, but, a treaty marriage, if you will, I tend to like that kind of secondary storyline in a fantasy. But with this one, it just really missed the mark for me. Now, I will say, these books, as I'm told, are written in duologies, but it's one interconnected series. It's 6 books long right now. So the story does not finish in the Bridge Kingdom, at least for the initial story we get. It's supposed to finish in the Traitor Queen, which is book 2. And I initially thought I was going to read that, but the longer I sit with this, I don't think I'm going to. I really struggled with the fall off in the Bridge Kingdom. It starts out with one of my favorite things, a woman's wrong. It starts out with a solid plot twist. It starts with me questioning this character I just met, but also immediately rooting for her. And whereas we're getting to know the king she's married to, or getting married off to, and I guess subsequently is married to, I start to like him. And I realize I start to like both of them way too early into this book. I also think where I struggled was with how the author chose to write our queen. And I say that because there are moments where she is so insightful and her logic as she's thinking through some things start to make sense. But then she'll think about something from her past or that her father or one of his aides taught her. And it's like her brain is just off. And she just intrinsically believes those things despite seeing other evidence in front of her face. And I really struggled with that. I really struggled with having to remember that this girl has to be somewhere between, I don't know, 16 and 20. And that she was, like I said, raised in isolation with her like 10 other sisters and some servants and some teachers, but was selectively taught things and selectively withheld things. But then also the author is choosing to try to write her as this like badass female character. And it's like, she can't be both. She can't be this conniving, thoughtful traitor who can wield knives like no other while also being the most Pollyanna character. It just didn't work. It just really didn't work. And you know what? I honestly wish that it had felt a little more YA in the writing. And it just didn't. And I think if it had, I probably would have given it a little bit more of a pass. Or if it was, a little more definitive that she was, a child bride, I guess. And that's not what I want. But it just, when this happens and the girl is clearly 17 and like feels 17, you give a lot a pass because you go, at 17 you have no life experience. You've only experienced certain things. Your thoughts about what's right and what's wrong and how countries work and politics are very warped and very naive and very sometimes altruistic, but in a way that makes no sense to reality, and you have to learn the reality of how the world works. And I think if I got a little more of that, I would have been on her side some more, but it just felt, I don't know. A lot of it felt like standard example, this is how to write a fantasy book, and we just didn't go off of the examples and write something of our own. I'm not saying it was like plagiarized or anything of that, because fantasy tropes are tropes. This is what happens when you read genre fiction. There are classic tropes in every genre and people use them. And it's nice when they use them sometimes in a specific way that makes you feel like you recognize the story that you're in because you've seen certain things before. But I wanted the foundation of the tropes, but I wanted different window dressing on the house. Where I really think fantasy can thrive sometimes is when the tropes of fantasy, or really any genre fiction, is used in a foundational way. Think of it as like the 2x4 beams you see in a house going up, but then each house has a different front door and maybe even a different shaped awning, and the roof tiles are different, and some have the driveway in the front, some have it in the back, and you get what I'm saying. Like all the details of it make it unique in its own. But this just felt like I was in like a Stepford Wife community of everything is the same. Like if you said, tell this apart from other new adult romantasy that's out there right now with this setup, I couldn't tell it apart. Now, granted, what I will say is I feel like this series has been out for a very long time, and this is just the trad publishing resurgence for it because it got picked up. So it could be the starting place for this kind of story, and I just don't know because I'm just getting to it in 2025. So I don't want to like completely diminish it in that way, because this feels a little bit like potentially a Red Queen, Fearless, Powerless, whatever situation where it's like one of those clearly came first. But I'm just, like I said, I'm not super familiar with Danielle Jensen's work, and I only kind of passingly read fantasy romance. I tend to lean more into a little bit more traditional fantasy when I'm going to do it. So it just didn't work for me, and it made me really sad. I then decided nonfiction was the way to go. You know what? Looking at this stack, I did a really good job of reading books that were existing for me and books that have been past publisher mail that I've needed to read. This actually was sent to me in June, I want to say, maybe late May. So I got to this very fast. This is Nothing More of This Land by Joseph V. Lee. And this is a story about the Wampanoag people, but also about Joseph just growing up with not only within the community, but also being of, I want to say, Japanese ancestry. And his struggles. No, he learned some Chinese. I think people assumed he was Japanese. But we are with him not only through his time in Martha's Vineyard, which is where the Wampanoag people are from, but he also grows up to become a journalist and specifically writes about indigenous stories. And so we also see him going to visit other tribes and seeing how they're dealing with some of the same things the Wampanoag are, but everyone's kind of in a different place in their journey. And I really appreciated this view. The beginning of the book is Joseph talking about how different he felt because he does not look indigenous in the way we stereotypically think indigenous people in America look. Like I mentioned, he does have a strong Asian background. I think from both sides of the family actually were from China, from various areas of it. But then he also has, like I said, Wampanoag ancestry in him as well. He grows up in the Wampanoag community, and he thinks of himself as Wampanoag first. And he talks about how when you have a multi-layered identity, sometimes different aspects of your identity become first, depending on where you are, who you're with, and their understanding of the different layers of you, or maybe the one layer of you they understand. And he also talks about the struggle he feels in fighting for a very specific, or maybe not so specific, view of what it means to be indigenous in America today, what it looks like to try to retain tribal land, if he can continue to retain tribal land. He's had some family land passed down to him, and he talks about the struggles of that, especially when the area your tribe is in is a hot spot for wealthy Americans, like top 1%, 0.5% people to vacation on, and they own these homes and are only there for 6 weeks out of the year, but they're so threatened by people who founded the island and gave it its economy. This is one of those stories, I think, that because of its subject matter, I think a lot of people can kind of feel like, oh, I know about colonialism. I know about the fact that many indigenous tribes have lost their land. And yes, while that is true, even as someone who's grown up in two areas that, while all of America is stolen land, I have grown up in two areas specifically where there was incredibly strong indigenous influences. I spent my first 8 years of life in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And if you look at the surrounding towns like Muskogee, I spent a lot of time in Muskogee as a child. There's very strong indigenous ties there. And then moved to Virginia at 8.5, spent 8 to 16 in Virginia. And I mean, Jamestown is there. The amount of history that you learn in school there. Texas is so skewed. It's funny, I live here now, and I feel very thankful that I got to skip Texas history, because I think about how like aggressive people are here about that, and I'm like, the area I grew up in is why we have a country. Like, y'all can feel the way you feel about it, but like, we're here because of that, for better or for worse. That is just factually true. So it's interesting to see how here, indigenous people, it's like, you just think of like the casinos around the Red River, and that's kind of it, which is very sad to me. And I'd like to know more about what tribes are native here and what it looks like for them as far as like land retention and things like that. And if it is just around the casinos. Reading this book made me want to do more research about my own community, and what more can you ask for out of a nonfiction? But one of the things I really liked about this was the choice he made and how he approached different things, and how his own reframing of what colonialism is, how it's impacted his life, how it still impacts how the tribe runs, and not in the way you would think, like, not from like government oppression, although that is very, very present, but in the way their tribe runs and leans on colonialist tenets without necessarily calling them that, or sometimes even realizing it. I think when you've been indoctrinated into something, sometimes it's really hard to let go of. And sometimes it's hard to recognize that the rules and tenets you have lived on for so long, even when you try to move into a different space, still find their way into aspects of your life. And so I just really appreciated his approach. I would say this makes a fantastic audiobook. So if you can get that from your library or, your audiobook provider of choice, I would recommend it. I think it's told in these fun little vignettes, and so it makes the experience so good. And then last but not least, I just was really on a how the government's affecting us kick, I guess, because I read Chain Gang All-Stars by Nana Kwame Adeji Brenya, and this is so good. In fact, I'm looking at this line from The Atlantic on the front. It says epic, intoxicating, and I can't think of two better words to describe this. I really loved the choice I made to wait to read this book. I picked this up and read the first chapter maybe 6 months ago, and when I was reading it, I remember thinking, this is really special, but I don't feel like I'm in the headspace to appreciate how special it is, and so I put it down. I love this so much. If you don't know, Chain Gang All-Stars is about people from the prisons across America. This is a futuristic kind of, but not really America. Honestly, this could be 2025 or it could be 2125, but people have a choice of leaving their general corporal punishment in, private prisons around America to join the Chain Gang All-Stars. It's called CAPE, actually. Criminal Action Penal Entertainment. And this is essentially like bringing back gladiating. They go around to these different arenas. You fight other people. You murder them. But instead of it being a thing you go to jail for, you kind of rise in the ranks, and you're supposed to stay in it, I think, for 3 years. And if you stay in it and survive for 3 years, like, you become a colossal and then a grand colossal. And ultimately, you're supposed to be free after, I think, 36 months. And essentially, you're getting your sentence commuted through this process. But no one ever makes it out. There's one guy who made it out, and it was very clearly like a government plant. And then everyone else who's been close to making it out has either been murdered in the arena, murdered by their own chain. So you kind of have these groups that are like, calling them families feels weird, but if you're on the same chain, you don't fight each other. But sometimes you go into fights together. It feels weird to call it beautiful, but it was beautiful. I think the way that Brenda conceptualized this felt really realistic. I really actually appreciated that he chose not only to give us the views of the people running CAPE and running the Chain Gang, people who were in it, who were previously in prison. We see people while they're in prison and the choice they make to choose to join this, knowing that there's a 99% chance they're going to die in the next few days or weeks or months or years. But we also see the people who choose to consume this product. It is a reality TV situation for like 85% of it. And then when they go to the arenas, I assume those are televised, because there's at one point a character who's like watching tape back of a Colossal's previous runs. But it's also it's a live sporting event. Calling it sports is so weird. There's an ESPN aspect to it in a way. There's all of these things where you're looking at the way we allow our society to run right now. And I think especially with things like Alligator Alcatraz that just happened, and our prison industrial complex in general, and how many of our prisons are now private, I could see this happening in the next 50 to 100 years, honestly, maybe even sooner, with the way that we move as a country and how desensitized we are to the people who are in the penal system. I really liked the choices that were made with the protesters that were in this book who were actively fighting against this system. There is one woman in particular, her father was a very well-known colossal in the Chain Gang, and she talks in here about how she wants him to be free, but she does not want him with her, and how complicated those feelings are. And I think about that a lot, how people in our lives can hurt us, can damage us, but that we also don't think that they deserve to live in prisons like livestock with sometimes barely running water, no AC in the summer, questionable food. Because at its core, it's supposed to be this rehabilitation process, right? Where someone goes in for doing who knows what from varying degrees, too. Like, I think about how so many people are in prison for their crimes against the government, not other people, which is a complex thing to talk about because a lot of them, someone is hurt, but the state has chosen to prosecute you, or the federal government has chosen to prosecute you. And so it's you versus the government, not you versus that person. And I also think about things like money related crimes where like no one physically got hurt, and how I don't think sometimes that it makes sense for people to be in places like that for things like that when there are so many other things that could lead to not only them being rehabilitated, but the elimination of the need for that crime in general. But I digress. This story to me was perfect. It was the only 5-star read I had this. Well, that's a lie. I would give Devil is Fine a 5-star and the nonfiction too. But this is the only story that I went into knowing I was going to have a 5-star good time, and it delivered on that. I don't know what I'm going to be reading next. I honestly haven't really started anything this month. I've been trying to start Catabasis, and I'm really struggling with it, not because of the content, but because I can't seem to sit still long enough to read on my Kobo. I am going on a plane next week, so I have 2 plane rides next week, so maybe we'll get more into that. But yeah, I am also trying to find my way back here to YouTube. I keep telling myself, like, oh, maybe just take a break for the rest of the summer, work on some content so that way you just have it available to send out. And then the other part of me is like, but I miss talking to y'all and uploading things. So I don't know. I do have an idea that I am brainstorming and actually just wrote out possible TBRs for, and that has me kind of excited. I'm hopeful that as we near fall, my hunger for talking about books on the internet comes back. I hope that getting this fun little microphone brings that in as well. I think also making the choice to limit how much I'm on like TikTok and Instagram, specifically in the book spaces, has helped me a lot with letting go of the pressure I feel, not only to read, but to read specific titles. This is the most diverse month I think I've had in reading. And I don't mean in the who the authors are and their identity, because I think I do a pretty good job of that in general, but just, I mean, I read a fantasy romance, I read a nonfiction, I read a thriller, I read a literary fiction, 2 literary fictions. You know, it's just kind of all over the place, but in the best way possible. It made picking up the next book, even if I didn't love it, still an enjoyable experience because I knew I wasn't going to be just reading the same thing over and over again. I think my choice to break up with romance for a little bit is working out for me. I'm not giving it up completely. I will always love romance books, but I needed to diversify the genres that I was reading, and I think when I go back to steadily reading romance regularly, like say 3 to 4 titles a month, it'll feel good again, you know? So with that being said, thanks for listening to me ramble. I know there's a lot of rambling in this video. Leave me a sun emoji and a wave emoji if you've made it this far, and I will see you all in another video very soon.